right, welcome back to Self, Sleep, Exercise, Love, and Food. As always, I'm Dr. Sean Hashmi. Now, today's topic is gut health and exercise motivation. What the heck is the link, and what can you really start doing differently in your own life to be able to increase your motivation to keep up with all of those New Year's resolutions that you said you would continue? So, there's a really interesting study that was published in the journal Nature, and what they were looking at was why some mice use their exercise wheel a lot, while others, they absolutely wanted nothing to do with it. So what the researchers did was they used these machine learning algorithms and they looked at all sorts of factors. Now, these were things like genome sequences, gut bacterial species, bloodstream metabolites, and the question really was, could any one of those things explain why there was such a difference in motivation among certain mice going on? Now, to my surprise, what was interesting was that genetics really seemed to have very little to do with activity level. Instead, what really was the key was the gut bacterial species that were there. Certain gut bacterial species actually were able to enhance the mice's motivation going on. How did they find this out? Well, the researchers gave mice broad spectrum antibiotics. The idea was to kill off all of those gut bacteria and see how they would do in terms of how far they would run on the wheels going on. And what they found was that just by giving them these broad spectrum antibiotics, the mice actually ran 50% less going on. Then what the researchers did was they actually sequenced the RNA in the mice's striatum. Remember, the striatum is the part of the brain that's responsible for motivation. And that's where they found that there were actually reduced levels of dopamine compared to the mice that didn't have the broad spectrum antibiotics going on. So now, in addition to this particular study, over several years, there have been some very innovative experiments in which researchers have found two specific strains of bacteria that are tied to essentially better motivation and performance. And those are Eubacterium rectale and Coprococcus eutactus. Now, these are a mouthful, but I find that the gut bacterial names become harder and harder to pronounce as the time goes on. But essentially, what's interesting about these specific gut microbiome bacteria is that they produce fatty acids called amides. Now, these amides, they interact with endocannabinoid receptors in the gut. So here comes the pathway. It's a little bit complex, but bear with me for a second. Endocannabinoid receptors, what they essentially do is they signal the brain to decrease monoamine oxidase. Now, monoamine oxidase is a compound that basically breaks down dopamine. So by decreasing monoamine oxidase, what you're essentially doing is increasing dopamine in the brain. And dopamine is what will give you that runner's high, or in the mice's case, the feel-good effect to essentially keep running. So now the real question is what about for us humans? Is it possible that if we take in certain probiotics that may help? The answer is we don't know, but the research is already underway to look at that impact in humans. But what we know so far is that gut bacteria plays such a key role from our mood, from diseases like Alzheimer's, dementia, kidney disease, where we've talked about the role of uremic toxins and how they're produced inside the gut. And the way you can improve your gut microbiome is actually a lot simpler than we think. Probiotics may have a role, but even simpler than that is eating more variety of foods, specifically whole foods, plant-based, exercising more, getting adequate sleep going on, reducing smoking, reducing alcohol intake going on. Just the basics that we all know to do can actually help us to have a healthy, happier gut, which can translate into all things of these that we've talked about, specifically one of them being possibly exercise motivation. Thanks so much for checking out this episode. As always, if you got questions, comments, just drop them in the chat below, and I'll be sure to address them in a future episode. Thanks.